Welcome to Insight Builder channel, large language model automators, Python experts, and my dear friends. Deep dive into datasets for text-to-text datasets in Argilla. This discussion is about working on text generation models. So what is a purpose of a text-to-text dataset? Well, it's to train a text-to-text generation model. It's basically called as large language models, models like Gemma, ChatGPT, GPT-4, all these models are kind of a text generation models. So how these models work, let us take a look. Basically, there are lots of tasks in NLP that can be considered as a generation task. So the basic generation task is that you give a text data input with an instruction and the neural network model provides a data out. So that's one of the most used mode for you guys, right? So you must have started prompting, creating agents, trying to create JSON out of the data that you have in your hand, the text input data that I'm talking about. So all these things will come under the generation model that we are talking about. Then comes the translation. I hope you guys remember in the past there used to be something called as Google Translate. If you have worked with any of the companies, MNC companies, then at least for sometimes you must have used the translation between English to some other language. So that kind of a model is what I'm talking about, translation models. So that will have text data input in language 1, and the model will generate the text data output in language 2. And then comes the summarizing model. So you give a large amount of text to the model, and the model summarizes it into a concise paragraph. And then the question answering with the context. So you ask the model a question along with the context, and the model is able to provide the correct answer. So all these kinds of tasks can be considered as a text-to-text task. Fine. So how this particular model is trained? What is the the block diagram of this? It's very simple, guys. What happens is the text data input, right? There are lots of text data input that you have in the real world. You take the text data input and you break it. So you take a long summary or a long paragraph and you break it into half, and you convert one half into text data input and then the other half into the appropriate output. So you can see my mouse here. That's how the dataset gets created. The appropriate output that we're talking about can be modified based on the text data input instruction. So if you want the output to be in the JSON format, if you want the output to follow some format of function output or some kind of a template, then this appropriate output should be already formed into such a template. All these aspects can be easily done when you are going to use the text-to-text dataset. Think about it. In the past, even today, there are lots of text generation datasets inside Hugging Face Hub, inside PyTorch. Believe me, even in your own textbooks, that whichever you are having, you can actually parse out the text from your textbooks and you can train large language models. So there are a couple of videos that I've already made on SFT. I'll be attaching that along with this video also. So there you can see that you can use the transformers library for creating the trainers, and you can feed the dataset whichever you have got. But here it is little more involved. You can actually control the text data and in the format you want. So we'll be seeing a couple of examples on how you can control the output data, and not just for one data point or two data points. For in thousands of data points, you can actually create these text-to-text datasets, and you can actually pull a team of people to work on your project, and you can get it done very fast rather than doing as a single person. If you have Argilla, then you can actually collect a group of people to work on it, and even if 10 data points is done by one person, hundreds of data points can be completed by 10 to 15 people. So that is the idea of working with these text-to-text datasets. So I have given you a basic overview. Once you have the input and once you have the output, the same thing is pushed into the trainer, and the trainer will create the neural network model, trained neural network model. I am there is a lot of videos that discuss about training this, but the most important aspect is actually creating your data sets. So enough talk, let's dive into the code. The data will be available in the GitHub repo. This particular code, the code link will be shared with you guys in the description below. And this is a Jupyter notebook. If you scroll down in the Jupyter notebook, you will see the Gen1 text-to-text dataset. So there are two generations of text-to-text datasets in Argilla. So we will first look at the generation 1. I've already connected with the Hugging Face subspace. Just a second. And I've already logged in. So this Hugging Face subspace contains the Argilla server. Let's go back to the notebook. Let's begin by creating a very simple text-to-text record. So in order to create this text-to-text record, you will need two things. You will need the text that you are going to provide as the input. So that comes under the text field, and the output that you are going to expect from the model is the prediction that you are also going to provide. So what happens is, once I execute this particular text-to-text record will go and sit inside the Argilla server. It's straightforward. There is not much of a settings to be done or anything. The data set gets created right away, and you can start pushing. Okay, so here the error is, I need to change this into a string. Let me push it again. So I had actually created a separate variable as hfgilla that was assigned to the string hfgilla. Fine. So I have this text-to-text dataset created. So let us go back right now, and yeah, you see that the server got updated, and you can go to the settings first. So let me show you the settings, and right there you see that soon you will be able to edit the information. So it's not giving you any information. It's just telling that it's a text-to-text dataset. That's it. And there is no questions. There is no labels. Nothing. Let's go to the dataset. So in the dataset, if you see, this is a very long record. This is the text that you have provided, and this is the prediction that I've got. And basically I can change this. So I can actually say, I can update this as an annotation, right? And I can press shift enter. The moment I press shift enter, what happens is this actually gets saved, right? That's what they are talking about. And the record is validated. You can see that validate option is coming up here. That's how it works. Now just think about it. You have some 1,000 records, and 1,000 records all have the text input and their respective predictions. Assume that you have you wanted to create a data set which has text input and you want JSON output, and you have actually given this to open source model like Gemma or Llama 2 or whatever model that you like, and it has actually created the output. Now you want to look at those outputs and you want to modify it, because open source models don't have very good JSON support. I'm just giving an example. Okay, if it doesn't have very good JSON support, you can actually take all those 1,000 outputs, and so for an example here, the JSON output might look like this. So if I remove this, I will change it like this. So record, let me create a JSON output of this record, and this is a very long record. Now the moment I convert this, okay, and I validate this, what will happen is this particular text input will be having this output assigned to it. So this is actually called as annotation. And like this, think that there will be some thousands or 2,000 or even 100,000 records which you are going to spread across all your team, and they will do the annotation, and you can actually then train the neural network model. So that's how the training of the neural network model works. So any kind of things you can do it here, but can this be improved? So this is a text-to-text record that is from generation 1. Now let us go back to the code, and we are going to see the generation 2 text-to-text dataset using the feedback dataset record. So let's dive in. So here you can see that I have mentioned about diving into feedback dataset. You don't need to go here. We have to go to a different location. So you have to go to Gen 2 feedback datasets templates. So this is where we have to go, and there we already discussed about text classification, token classification, etc. Now we are going to discuss about text generation. So as I already discussed, let us go back. So now I am actually diving into generation 2. The idea here is that there are many tasks that you can do in with text to text model. So we have generation model, generation task, we have translation, we have summarization, we have question answering, right? All these tasks have been created as templates inside Argilla. So each task will have different kinds of inputs and outputs. Like the regular text to text data, like we saw, it will have text input and text output. But in case of summarization, you will have a huge text but a very small output. And in case of translation, you have one language and the output will be in a different language. So like this, there will be variations in the inputs and outputs. In order to manage these variations in inputs and outputs, and to also help in making, excuse me, we are jumping into the code, and we are going to look at a couple of templates here. If you have looked at my earlier discussions on token classification, text classification, I have touched a bit about feedback dataset, and also I have done a full overview on how the feedback dataset works in the backend. So there is a full cut discussion that I have done. Just a second. So here is a full cut overview. You can look at this file also. This is an Excalibur file. It will be shared in the description. Will be shared in the link. You can take a look at that. So feedback dataset will require all these parts, arguments, in order for the datasets to be initiated. And each of these arguments have their own sub arguments. Anyway, I'm not going to dive into this right now. We are going to go back to the dataset and we are going to look at the code. We are going to start working with the summarization template. We have to call the feedback dataset. We have to import this from Argilla base module itself, and that has got this particular method called as for summarization. Once you call this for summarization, you have to provide these points. You have to say metadata properties vector settings as none, which is actually not required. You can say use markdown equal to true because it's required for us to have a markdown formatting on the UI. And guidelines, you can actually provide a guideline, or if it is not required also, it's okay. So it's not mandatory, but you can say this is the feedback data set annotation for feedback dataset for summarization, right? This is a guideline that you are going to provide, and after that we are also going to create a feedback record. So in case of feedback dataset, whenever you are going to create a dataset, you have to follow it by creating a record. You should not push the feedback dataset to Argilla. Keep this in mind. If you push the dataset to Argilla, then this particular variable name that you have assigned to this feedback dataset will lose the connection. Keep that in mind. Lose the connection in the sense, after the dataset has been pushed to the Argilla, you cannot further do any kind of adding the record or deleting the record, changing the details of this dataset using this variable. You have to again connect to Argilla, pull the dataset, then only you can work on it. So I will explain it as we go forward. So here I am creating a record, simple record, which is this is a very long sentence and paragraphs of text. So assume that this is a very long text, and that is the dataset I am creating. So once I create this template feedback dataset, what will internally happen is it will actually create a feedback dataset with fields which is like this. So this text and this text has to match. If they don't match, then the Argilla will throw an error. Next, we are going to create a text question. So basically, once you give this particular input, we will expect a summary of this input, right? This is a summarization task. So we will give a huge amount of text data and you will expect a summary of the text data. So what we are trying to do is, in this text question, we will ask the annotator to provide the summary. That's what we are going to do, and the rest of the things we are going to leave it as it is, right? And then you are going to add the record. As I told you, that the record that you are going to create here will be added here using this variable itself, and then you are going to push this variable dataset to Argilla server. So I'm going to change this right now, and I'm going to execute this cell. So once I execute it, you'll see that I'm getting an error. So let me check what is the error. Feedback data set is not defined because I actually did not import it. So let us say from Argilla import feedback, feedback dataset and feedback record. Both of these things are required, or else it's gonna error out. Let us proceed to the next step. Now I'm going to execute it again, and this time it will actually go through, and then we will go and look at the output in the Argilla server. Let us go back to the server now. So in the server, if you go to the home, you will see that this is the old record, and this is the new feedback data set that we created. So click on this and you'll see that the UI is different, right? So this is a very long text that we gave, and this is the text that you saw in the fields, and this is a summary. This is a summary that is expected. So this is a question that is rendered here as a text box. So you can provide a summary here. So this is the summary of the above text. And then once you give this summary, if you say submit, then this particular record will get submitted, and there will be no more pending record. So if you go to submitted, you will see that this record is already submitted. Now this is how you actually start annotating and curating the dataset. Here you see only one data point. As you already saw here, if you are going to have a huge amount of dataset, like from Hugging Face dataset or your own dataset, what you will do is you will actually create these feedback records in loop. You will create a list of these feedback records, and then you will add that to this particular area, and then you will add the records to the dataset, and then you will push to Argilla. Once you do that, it will actually get rendered here. You will see instead of one, you will see many records here. That's how it will work. As I complete all this kind of tasks in Argilla, that is NLP related tasks and datasets in Argilla, I will be going to a projects also. But I am going into the details of these datasets ahead of time, so that it will be easier once we go into more complex projects. So that's the idea. Fine, let's go back. Now you have seen the summarization dataset. Now we are going to go to the next one. So the next template that you are going to look at is for translation. You guys must be looking at all these outputs, and I would leave it you to review these outputs and see what is happening and try to understand. The most important thing is the more you are able to read the output. I mean, it is a fascinating log that is provided by the Argilla team. I really liked Argilla backend and the front end support for this kind of full information that they're sharing. So do read it. It has a lot of information, and you learn a lot from these outputs also. So keep that in mind. Next is for translation. So you saw summarization, and now we are going to do it for translation. Not much of a difference, right? The dataset is getting initialized using the same kind of arguments. So if you go up, you'll see that it is same kind of arguments. Here also it's same kind of arguments. Only difference is this area. You can see that the text question has something called as target, and the text field has something called as source. So these two are a little bit different. Here the source is the language 1, that is the source language, and target is the language 2, that is the target language that we are going to translate it to. So the source, so you can see that I am creating a input here in the record that this is a foreign language text to be translated. So assume that this is Klingon language that the aliens have brought it to us, and we want to translate it to English. So this is going to be the alien language. Now the target is going to be English, and that's what we are going to annotate. So the data set is created here from using the templates, and the record is created here. Once the data set is created, this entire process actually gets done internally. It's not shown to us, but it has been abstracted using this method. And once that is done, you have to again add the record and push it to HFGilla workspace. I'm going to make this as a string, and you might be wondering why I'm doing this again and again, but yeah, let's execute this, and this time it will actually go and create a new data set called as ds underscore translation. So here the output is getting collapsed, and you can see that it is again updating us the outputs. Let us go back and go to home. You'll see that there is a new data set ds underscore trans. So if you open this, this is a data point for translation. So you can see the source here. This is a foreign language text to be translated, and that is the target. So here is the translation provided by the annotators, right? And submit. So that's it. This is how you actually curate the dataset for translation job. So if you go to submitted, you'll see that this has been submitted right now. Let's go back and let us continue. So there is one more question and answering dataset. In this case, I don't need this. We have already imported it. But if you want, you can actually import it again. For each of the cell, you can import this. Most importantly, I do this again and again because by practicing this, you can easily work on tutorials, and you can understand what's going on in the tutorial. So that's why I am manually importing all these things by typing it. So you can also follow it. It will help you a lot. So here you can see that I am using the for question answering template, and right there you can see the fields are a little bit different. So there are two input fields. There is a question field and there is a context field that we need to provide, and the annotators will actually provide the answer, right? So that is how the feedback dataset gets created, and you can see that here also the arguments are same. The arguments are still the same, but only based on this particular method, the internal the arguments that is used for feedback dataset gets modified. Once that is done, you can see that we are creating the inputs like this for the record. So there is a question, which is where the question is getting presented, and there is a context which will be supporting the question, and then we are going to push the record. So yeah, again there is an error because I don't have this variable. So I'm okay, just a minute. Yeah, I have to say from Argilla import feedback dataset and feedback record. So that should resolve that. And yeah, let us go back. Let us look at the outputs. You can see ds underscore qa, and you can see that this is the question that we created. This is the context, and we are waiting for the answer. So annotators will provide the answers here, right? So this is how the actual data sets getting curated. Let us go back to the code. So these are the various kinds of data sets that you can come up, that you can do with text-to-text related tasks. Let us go back to the Excalidraw, and we were discussing on the, just a second. So we are discussing on the text-to-text dataset. So we saw what is the purpose of the text-to-text dataset, that is to create and train the text-to-text generation model. We also looked at various kinds of generation model. The basic generation model where we give the text input and we get the text output, translation model, summarization model, Q&A model. There is also a couple of other models that we can actually create from these things. In fact, even you can create a classification model as a generation model also. I mean, at the end of the day, when you are going to give the text input, and if you give an instruction telling that classify this particular text input as class 1 or class 2, then this generation model will become a kind of a classification model also. So this is more, after you understand how these fine tuning and how the models are getting trained, then you can do all such kinds of experiments. But here the idea is very simple. We are going to give a text input in all these cases, and we are going to get the text output. Whether we give it as single text input or multiple text inputs, the output is going to be single line or single paragraphs of outputs. That is how the models work. And we also saw how the models are trained, text-to-text generation models, and how the text-to-text dataset in Argilla sits and helps the annotators as well as the developers, AI developers, to train the model and create new neural networks. I believe that you have learned a lot about the text-to-text datasets in Argilla. I believe that you will have a lot to practice. So take your time and try to understand it. Take a look at this notebook and try to execute the cells one by one. You will get to understand this very clearly. Till the next video, stay tuned and practice, 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 practice. See you guys. Have a great time.